何かがこういう。
お、一時じゃあ、おい。
Hello and welcome to Boxing Tonight, Mirror Fighting's look ahead to this evening's bouts with me, Martin Dolman, and my colleague Rich Jones. Please do give the video a thumbs up and please do subscribe to the channel. We're going to look at two fights tonight, one in London, one in Texas. We'll start off closer to home, our home anyway. Lyndon Arthur defends his Commonwealth light heavyweight title against Anthony Yarde, which, first of all, we should say a week after we had Daniel Dubois against Joe Joyce. It is refreshing to see a main event between two Brits. Anthony Yarde has lost a fight, of course, against Sergey Kovalev, but you can almost put that to one side for a bit. It's just refreshing to see these fights being made, especially, as we keep saying, at this time.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good fight. It's a, an even well, I think Yarde's obviously favoured over Lyndon Arthur, but, they're two good British fighters, two really good prospects. So, yeah, it's a pretty close one to call. It's going to be an interesting fight. And, yeah, like you say, it's good to see these sort of matchups made. When we went into lockdown, this was the sort of thing we were told we were going to be getting more of, these sort of domestic, quite close fights that fighters maybe would have been able to sort of avoid in times gone by in order to, go down different routes. But, yeah, we're getting these sort of fights now. And we had Dubois Joyce, which lived up to the billing last week. So hopefully this one can do the same.
Lyndon Arthur, Anthony Yarde is the favourite in this fight. I feel like there are quite a few people, though, are with Lyndon Arthur for the one tonight. But if you look at his record, he's had 17 fights, he's won them all. He didn't fight an opponent with a winning record until his 11th fight. And, he won the fight against, I don't know his name off the top of my head, a guy from Ghana who'd been fought out of Ghana twice before. So much of this is about potential, and I guess you could similarly compare that to Daniel Dubois a little bit, in that we thought if he was going to beat Joe Joyce, he'd have to come on a bit and then show us that he really was made of what we thought he was made of, and in the end he didn't. I think it's similar with Lyndon Arthur, in that if you look at his record, it's bare. I'm not saying Anthony Yarde's record is brilliant, but I think Lyndon Arthur's got a bit to prove. Yeah,
it's a massive step up, isn't it? I think the only kind of one we've got to go by is the fact they both fought Dex Spellman. Obviously, Lyndon Arthur won on points, put in a good performance, but Anthony Yarde stopped him in, I think it was the 6th round, and looked pretty dominant. So that's the only one we've really got to use as a sort of yardstick. But yeah, you're right. It's a massive step up for Lyndon Arthur. He's looked good in the fights he's had. He's looked technically sound. He's looked pretty sharp, and I think most people are basing their sort of predictions on this fight based on what they think that Lyndon Arthur's ceiling is, based on what they've seen, rather than what they know, because there's only so much we can read into it. But likewise for Anthony Yarde, if we were sort of talking 12-18 months ago, before he'd gone out to Russia and fought Sergey Kovalev, we'd be talking about this as a big step up for him as well. And since then he's had a couple of fights, nothing too extreme. So I suppose while he has got a better record, it's still a step up for Anthony Yarde, with the exception of obviously that Kovalev fight where he got so much experience in that defeat. So yeah, there's a lot of ifs and buts in this one, especially on Lyndon Arthur's side. But yeah, that's what makes it such an interesting fight, I think.
You're definitely right about Anthony Yarde. Again, the Sergey Kovalev fight, he basically took away he had one good round, essentially, or part of a good round, really. To be fair, he did almost get him out of there, but once Kovalev survived, it was quickly game over after that, and Kovalev really dominated most of that fight with his jab. So again, he shouldn't really live off that fight too much, I don't think. And you're right, we shouldn't pay too much attention to it. Take it away, and you're right, Yarde's record or opponents he's fought anyway are not spectacular. A lot of what's been talked about with this fight is basically the boxer and the puncher, and I know that was put to Lyndon Arthur in the week, and he was a bit offended by it. He's like, well, I can punch too. Of course they can. They can all punch, especially with the small gloves on. But clearly, as you just mentioned, if you take Dex Spellman as a yardstick, which is a tricky thing to do, you've got a stoppage and you've got a points win. But definitely, I think Anthony Yarde is susceptible to somebody who has a good jab and who can technically dominate them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think it's going to come down to just how powerful Anthony Yarde is as well, whether he's got the power to sort of, you know, buzz Lyndon Arthur and keep him away. Because I think, yeah, like you say, Lyndon Arthur's got a pretty good jab. He's pretty technically sound, and he'll, as I say, we've seen that Yarde can be maybe a bit susceptible to that. And yeah, I guess the question is just how powerful Anthony Yarde is. A lot of his early opponents, he was able to just blast out there, blast away. That's been pretty much the way he's won most of his fights. So I guess it's going to be a big test for Lyndon Arthur's sort of chin and how we can take those punches. And if he can soak up the odd sort of decent connection from Anthony Yarde, then you think he might have the technical attributes to, you know, to keep him away and you know, come through quite well. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think, like you say, the stars make fights, and it is quite a fascinating sort of combination between the way the two of them fight. So it should make for an interesting one. Do you think that do you think that Arthur's got the jab and the ability to sort of, you know, maybe pick some holes in Anthony Yarde? Or
I think definitely will give him problems. I think it's always mentioned with Anthony Yarde is he had no amateur experience really, or very little, turned pro, and has had to learn on the job. You know, talk about that a lot, but it's very, very true with Anthony Yarde. So it's very possible that early on, I think, Lyndon Arthur will give him trouble. That will be the key part. And, you know, just until he is able to take a look at it. But for me, at some point, Anthony Yarde will get to him. You know, I think that's... Listen, okay, if after 4 or 5 rounds, Yarde's really struggling to get grips with it and to read the jab and to formulate his own response to that, then yes, he may well struggle because he gets more and more desperate, and the fight might just go away from him. But if he can read it within 3-4 rounds, start to get his own work off, then I think he'll start to dominate and may even stop him down the stretch 9-12. That would I definitely think Yarde is, for me, the winner of this fight.
Yeah, I think I do agree. I think he'll just have a bit too much. I don't think Lyndon Arthur will disgrace himself. I think he'll probably come out of it with, you know, maybe even enhancing his reputation a little bit, showing that he can mix it and be at a high level, and he'll probably learn a lot from it. But I think maybe he might not quite have enough. But it's a big night. I think it's a big night. It's got to be a big night for Frank Warren as well, because obviously the last sort of 2 or 3 years he's put so much of his efforts into promoting Anthony Yarde and Daniel Dubois. And if they were obviously the last two, the Dubois-Joyce fight, he was very much in the Dubois camp, despite Joe Joyce being one of his fighters. I think the same in this one, whereby Anthony Yarde's been the one that's been pushed a lot, even though Lyndon Arthur's one of his fighters. And I think if Dubois and Yarde were to lose in consecutive weeks, it'd be a real blow for him to end 2020. So, yeah, I think Frank will be definitely hoping for Anthony Yarde to come out on top, as given that Dubois is going to be facing quite a long recovery time, you'd imagine, from that eye injury. So, yeah, going to be interesting to watch that side of it as well.
Definitely, and especially in the week of his 40th anniversary as a promoter. I mean, he doesn't need another defeat, and he doesn't need to give Eddie Hearn any excuse to have another dig. I see their dinner is very much now off the table. So that fight is on BT Sport tonight. Later on in the early hours of Sunday morning, excuse me, really, really intriguing fight. Errol Spence makes his return, his first fight since his horrific car crash, which incredibly didn't kill him for a start, and hasn't seemingly left him with any long-term injuries. And he's going straight back into it against Danny Garcia. A lot of people big on Danny Garcia in this fight, Rich. And I guess it really does come down to whether Errol Spence, no matter what he says about how he feels, only he knows how he really feels, but also even he doesn't know how he'll feel in an actual fight, and not just in an actual fight, in a fight against someone who has only lost at the very highest level. Yeah,
exactly. That's, again, the unknown, isn't it? And I think even if Errol Spence is at his best, you know, we've seen Danny Garcia. I mean, I was quite surprised to see when I was looking up, he's 32, Danny Garcia. It feels like he's been around for so long, and obviously he's got a lot of miles on the clock. But, you know, he's been at the highest level. He's fought and beat some, you know, great fighters. He's only got a couple of defeats, which are against Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, and the Keith Thurman one was a pretty tight fight, a split decision. So, you know, even if Errol Spence is at his best and there's no after effects of this car accident, then this will be a tough fight, even if Errol Spence at his best. Now, I'd back Errol Spence at his best to come through it and win, but regardless of that, it's going to be a tough fight. So if there are any doubts or any sort of lingering things from the car accident that he had, then it's going to be a real tough night's work for him. I think it's fascinating to watch, and I don't really see how it can be a bad fight, to be honest. I think it's a really, really interesting one on paper.
Yeah, you're right. And I think even if you go back to before the car accident, Errol Spence's last fight was against Sean Porter, and that was a very close affair. I think Errol Spence deserved to win. He put him down in the 11th round, which basically just made sure of it, but it was still a split decision even then. So I think even before the car accident, we say, listen, this is a solid fight. Of course, we all want the Terence Crawford fight, but that can't happen at the moment. So it's still a solid fight. But especially now, neither of us can say how we would react if we were in a car accident. Not in terms of being a boxer, but just in terms of mentally and physically how you feel. Never mind being an elite athlete and having to go in there with possibly for 12 rounds against an elite fighter. But I suppose you have to base it on what you know, and we don't know how he is, so we have to almost assume that he is at his best, I think, and then just judge it on that. And if it turns out that he's not 100%, then it's just not something we can read into. Yeah,
exactly. And I think if he is at his best, like you say, it was a quite close one against Sean Porter, but he's a top class boxer. Errol Spence, I think pound for pound, he's probably one of the best in the world at the moment. So but for Garcia, it's a big fight. Like I say, he's had a couple of sort of narrow defeats in big fights recently, and his record's unbelievable. He's had some huge wins, and he obviously got a lot of miles on the clock quite early. But like I say, he's still only 32. And if Danny Garcia, you sense it's a sort of fight where if Danny Garcia can win against Errol Spence, then suddenly he's banged right up there again. He's one of the top fighters. Whereas if he loses, it probably knocks him down a level, and he becomes kind of he'll become like the opponent a little bit more in the future. So it's kind of you sense it's a big moment for Danny Garcia as well, to see which direction his career is going to go now, whether he's got time left to sort of stick at the very top, or whether it's going to be the start of him kind of dropping down out of the picture at the very top. But it's a fascinating division. Errol Spence is obviously a great fighter, and I think everyone who's a boxing fan would want to see him come back and be at his best after that car accident. And if he can come through and get a win against Danny Garcia, it would be an incredible story, given everyone's seen the clips of that crash and all that sort of thing. So it's interesting. I'm not sure how it'll go, but I think I'd probably lean towards Errol Spence, to be honest.
Yeah, as I say, I think based on what we know for sure, and basically judging on Errol Spence pre-car crash, then I would tend to agree. It's amazing to think. I don't know how long ago it was that Garcia fought Khan, but I guess that's the fight that the British fans might remember him for. And you're right, 32. He's not old at all. And whichever way this fight goes, hopefully, if Errol Spence does win, then we get the Terence Crawford fight within the next 12 months or so. But even if Danny Garcia does lose, it's probably not going to be, every round. And there's rematches there for him against Keith Thurman, potentially. I mean, Manny Pacquiao's there, but probably not him. But also with Sean Porter. So, as you say, it's a great division. And apart from Terence Crawford, they're all with PBC, so plenty of fights to be made in the future. And in a bonus for UK fight fans, if you did subscribe to Premier Sports for the Kell Brook fight a few weeks ago, you're still, even if you've cancelled since then, still able to watch this one tonight or in the early hours of tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. That is all from us. I'll be back tomorrow morning with a recap of both fights, and then on Monday with George Groves and Declan Taylor for a more in-depth look. Until then, enjoy the fights.